Next, we will have our discussion around this. And I think before we start, I do want to make a comment about the amount of material that this group has reviewed. Jon has a piece of that information. So it has not been done in a vacuum. We've looked at all of the information. We've gone out on our own. We've looked at pros and cons. It's not that we're just looking one way, but we have really taken this seriously, and there's a lot of information to shift through, and there's a balance. There's pros, there's cons, but be very clear, this committee has really taken a hard look at this issue. So who would like to start? Jon?
Just first off, thank you to the public for the feedback from both perspectives. Honestly, over the last 5 months, I've learned more about artificial turf than I realized we could discuss. So I appreciate the feedback, the meetings, and as Patrick said earlier, this is our third public meeting about this topic. There have been countless other meetings that have happened over the summer. I participated in a few, one with Gale and Associates, which was about a 4-hour deep dive into the options available, kind of vetting, the different infills, of which there are 8 to 10. There's a lot of discussion with regards to crumb rubber infill, which is most commonly used in pretty much, majority of fields out there, and some concerns with regards to health and safety. So a lot of things have been discussed, evaluated, and really kind of reviewed by this committee, but also by the committee that's leading the project. So I think we've given a lot of careful consideration. I think where I'm at in terms of just, kind of putting these things into perspective, in terms of like the environmental benefits of artificial turf, we don't really talk about that a lot, right? I mean, we heard it a couple weeks ago. We went through the list, but I mean, reducing the dependencies on water resources, eliminating the use of the chemical compounds, kind of reducing dependencies on fossil fuels through not having to mow and maintain and things like that. These are little things, I know, but I mean, I think they need to be considered. But I also think, why are we talking about this project, right? In terms of, the usage, right? We say on the current natural grass, we get around 100 or less events per year. Artificial turf, 250 to 300. Let's be conservative and say 225 to 250. You're still doubling the use for our student athletes, which I think is really significant. We've talked about the safety risks with natural grass. I mean, I could go on. I think we've heard a lot from both sides. A revenue generation, certainly one of the things that I was concerned about as we look 10 years down the road from when this is installed, how are we going to replace it? And Patrick answered the question in terms of how we generate revenue and why would we look at this location as appealing to somebody that wants to rent the space. I would say first and foremost location, right? Proximity to 290. I think the estimates that Patrick provided are conservative. I think we could exceed that, in terms of rentals, and potentially put that into like a revolving account. So when we're in need of repair or replacement, that becomes the account to use. So there's no impact on the community if you're fiscally responsible like that. So yeah, I mean, that's just my perspective from not only being in the 3 public meetings, but being in the other meetings outside of the public meetings.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Jon?
Just a couple things. Let's go back to our history on fields in Shrewsbury. If I look back, and I predate Mr. Moss a little bit, but the field over at the old high school, we always had issues with drainage issues, usage issues. Any snowstorm, the field was just depleted for the whole year. We've had a similar problem here at the high school now, despite all the hard work that's done by the Parks Department. So we have a long-term problem here, and what we're trying to do is solve it. And to me, there's always a decision, right? It's a value judgment. It's cost-benefit. We look at it and say, is this $1.8 million that we're looking to receive private donations, is it worth it? And I look at 2 things, and we look at sustainability and safety, and those were the 2 factors that we looked at. And Jon just alluded to that, and we talked about this at our last meeting as well. That we talk a lot about sustainability, whether it was 2 years ago with funding in terms of adding additional staff, or in this, even adding the field. It's important that we get this private donation, these donations, that we don't saddle 10 years from now another committee sitting here with that hard value judgment, or the finance committee, or whatever committees are in place at that time. So I think it is absolutely imperative that we allocate any revenues over the next 10 years, gate receipts and the like. We're going to have to put that aside. I think it's important not to necessarily rely on it, and that is a conversation for a different day as to whether or not we should be relying on that or the town. But I think it's absolutely imperative that we make sure that this is sustainable. The other issue is safety, and there are two pieces that were brought up. The first one is in this, I didn't do my, I guess, environmentally friendly thing and print this whole book out, but the public health concerns. And there's lots of literature on both sides of the fence, but what persuaded me is right now we're not proving a negative. There are decisions on each side or conclusions that it may cause issues, but to me, I didn't see anything in here, whether through the various reports, that there's a causation there. So I think from a public health standpoint, the conclusion is that there is not an adverse consequence right now to safety. And as well as players, I think that in a rough New England terrain, particularly as we've spent a lot of time looking at concussions, you think about how hard the ground will get, particularly in the late fall, early winter time. I think that it provides a more level field for our student athletes to not end up with having as many personal injuries. Fortunately, we have seen a reduction in the number of concussions. I think this will further allow that. So I think from a sustainability and safety standpoint, those are important issues. And then the last issue, we talk a lot about community. And when we look at our strategic priorities, whether it's the enhancing value to our community, I think this is one of those that fits right within it. We're allowing, you look at any football game on Channel 29, or if you look at any athletic programs that are filmed, you have a lot of people there. Our community rallies around our student athletes, and it provides not only an opportunity for more people to attend or more venues for our student athletes, but also for other members of our community to have a field. We have 6,000 plus kids going to our public schools. We have very few fields. This will provide another venue for that, as well as an opportunity to showcase how great of a school system and facility we have. So sustainability, safety, and for community, I'm behind this right now, but understanding that the fundraising will be a challenge, and it will be very difficult to do. But I'm in favor of it.
Erin?
So all I would add, because both Johns spoke about what was on my list, is that having a synthetic turf field would also allow equity, allow more sports to play, both male and female. And when I think about athletics, and I myself was not an athlete, Irish step dancing wasn't part of a high school program, but I've seen the value of sports and think of it as co-curricular, not extracurricular. And having these opportunities that we had our students speak about, there is a lot of learning that is going on in team sports, in learning how to lose, learning how to be a winner, a gracious winner. There are so many beneficial lessons that come from sports that perhaps is not always seen by every single parent and community member. That's an additional reason why I'm in support of this project, along with all the other very salient points that my colleagues mentioned.
Jim?
So I agree with what's been said. I think we've heard a problem, and the problem is that the fields as they exist today are unsatisfactory. And this current situation is related partially to the limitations of resources for maintenance and partially to just the nature of the natural turf itself compared to the use that we would like to make of it. And so as a result, we've been canceling events or moving events, and that has been a problem and it has been a cost. We've heard from two camps, those who are pro-artificial turf and those who are pro-natural turf. And I think that I and my colleagues on this committee have kind of tried to go through all the information that we could get our hands on and look at it from a point of view of what is going to give us a higher quality field, what is going to give us more use, what is affordable, what are the maintenance costs, and then what is the effect on the environment and what is the effect on health. And we've gone through a lot of resources. You've seen the volume that we've gone through. We've also been contacted by a substantial number of people in the community, and they've provided additional resources to us. I've contacted the director of infectious disease for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. I too have contacted the Toxic Use Reduction Institute at UMass Lowell. I've reviewed every line of this report that we've received, and I will say that although there are a lot of chemicals that don't have standards with regard to the Environmental Protection Agency, that it appears to me that virtually every component of these items has been subjected to a standard. There have been outside agencies, third parties that have provided chemical testing and other tests on these items and have provided reassuring information. So with regard to the environmental toxicology program at the Mass Department of Public Health, the Consumer Product Safety Commission information, the New York and Connecticut Departments of Public Health, reviewing the items we've had, contacting the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, I feel that we have a very reasonable amount of information to attest to the safety of almost every component in the turf fields. And we've looked at the shock pads, we've looked at the carpets, and we've looked at the infill. The infill has this microban addition to it. And it is worth noting that at various periods of time in our history, it's been thought to be a good idea to use antibiotics in soaps and in a number of different things to cut down infection. Research has been conducted, and over the past 10 or 15 years at least, people have moved away from that. They found that the addition of these components has not cut down infection rates, that it does increase exposure to chemicals that may not be beneficial. Recently, the FDA has recommended removal of some of these antibiotics from certain soaps, not because they're liquid, but because they don't work and because they, again, may represent an exposure. My discussions with the director of the infectious disease unit at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, he also expressed concerns that it probably does no good and that it probably has the potential to generate microbe resistance in the environment. And also in contacting the people at the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, they also supported that theory. So at least from my point of view, I think that there are a number of benefits to be had from the artificial turf. I don't think we should get it with the microban. I do feel that the science of looking at environmental toxins and health risk is an evolving science, and that periodically this needs to be relooked at. And I also feel that given the time lapse between us voting tonight and the actual purchase of this item, that it may be a reasonable thing to see if there is new information that is available in the interval for us to reconsider.
Right.
So those are the thoughts that I have.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank anyone who spoke. We've had several pros, cons. It's not just the people coming forward tonight. We've had emails as well in both camps coming, but I think it's good. It's discussion. It helps us learn about each other's perspectives or what the elements are in the entire project. I'm looking at it just really, the public health and the safety piece. As Dale just mentioned, we've looked at both sides of the issue and weighed it carefully. We've also looked at the safety to players, and having a child who played 4 years of lacrosse and 4 years of field hockey, I know what it's like to play on the current surface. And there are physical issues that come with that, and that is something we do have to take into consideration. It's not about winning or losing, it's about the safety of the child environmentally as well as the surface. For us, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the community when we're looking at projects like this. So we have to look at the financial aspects, the sustainability. So we're taking into consideration all of those aspects. I don't think we're rushing into anything. This has been almost 6 months that we've been looking at this. We've had a lot of information to go over. One thing I did want to mention, we did have a comment about, why aren't the fields better maintained. They should have just been better maintained. I think our Park and Rec department has done a phenomenal job in the years even that my child was playing. They were always receptive to if Mr. Costa needed it or if there was an issue. And if we got 10 to 14 years out of our first turf field, I would think that is exceptional maintenance of what we have. So I don't want the public to think that it hasn't been kept up by the town, because it has. When we look at ongoing athletic, like Erin said, co-curriculars are not separate and distinct. We did have some comments, well, you don't need sports. You could use the money better elsewhere. Sports are part of the fabric of school, and you learn by playing sports, and they're student athletes, and it's something that is part of our community. Let's see. I agree with Dale on the whole microband piece, and if we have some discussion on that. Looking at the pros and cons of that and what does it add, I'm not seeing a value added. We have a natural UV light. Things take care of some of the bacteria and so forth. So I personally don't think we need that in there. And I also agree, if it is a positive vote, that this project isn't happening tomorrow. We have time, and we should do our due diligence and continue. If there is new material, we should definitely be looking at that as well. So I am in support of this. It's a big project. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's not about just infill. It's not just about safety or who's going to play on it and when. It's a lot of things that we need to look at, and we have to look at it as a something that we need to replace now in some form, and what's the best value to do that long term. So any other conversation around the microban or anything else, Erin?
So a clarifying question, microban, if it's not on there, is there a cost reduction, or is it just one price?
My understanding is no change in price, no change in warranty, no information that it would in any way affect the lifespan of the material.
Okay. Anything else from you? Nope. Dr. Sawyer, any comments?
The committee has a memo from me, and I guess first want to say, again, I appreciate the feedback, the emails that I've been able to read, and the comments at the last few meetings relative to folks who expressing their preferences. And obviously, when we're talking about health and safety of students, that's the primary issue that we should always be concerned about. And that's something that it's very important for the committee and for the administration to do due diligence. I do want to thank Mr. Collins and the team, in particular, my executive assistant, Beth McCollum, who helped collate all of these documents. But I think, to me, as in the memo I sent, the governmental organizations that are charged with making sure that the amount of material or the occurrence of it or how it's used is at levels that are not concerning relative to health and safety. That is their responsibility, and I think there are multiple government organizations that are very clear that this piece, and again, they're clear that at this point in time, even crumb rubber fields, which are in use at Concord Carlisle, whose superintendent I spoke to and spoke about the incredible additional amount of use their teams are getting to their benefit. I spoke to the superintendent in Medfield, who installed a project the same as this with the EnviroFill, very particularly positive about the shock absorption properties of the field and the quality and the amount of usage that they're getting. And essentially, as you've heard, I mean, I certainly appreciate the supposition that if it were possible and cost-effective to maintain a quote-unquote pristine natural grass field, however managed, organically or otherwise, then I don't think we'd be having this conversation. I would also respectfully suggest that this is not about some sort of vanity project. I could care less whether or not what the surface is, if because someone else is using it or keeping up with other districts. What matters to me is what's the quality piece for our district, what's right for our students, what's right for the program. And that's something that personally I'm convinced, based on what's been presented, that a synthetic turf field will accomplish the goals of allowing more usage, of having a better playing field in terms of evenness of play and quality for that reason. It does occur to me, of course, relative to all these issues, relative to health and welfare. You've heard a lot of names of different school districts that have adopted these fields. But I just looking at, someone mentioned earlier about the football game at Assumption College. Well, about 2 minutes of online searches Assumption College, WPI, Amherst College, MIT, Babson, Tufts, Northeastern, UMass Lowell, UMass Amherst, Harvard, all have synthetic turf fields. And I would, and this is sort of from a pragmatic point of view, I would have a hard time thinking that these esteemed institutions of higher learning would be putting these into place if they had any serious concerns about health and welfare of their athletes who were utilizing them. So in terms, from my perspective, this is something that has been vetted sufficiently. I appreciate the perspective, and the perspective coming from those who oppose it relative to a preference for whenever a non-synthetic material can be used to try to use that as a value approach. I can understand where they're coming from, but in this case, to take one field out of the acreage at the high school to meet these goals for the program, I think is reasonable and appropriate, and I think that the material presented makes it clear, at least to me, that the safety and health and environmental concerns are addressed. As Mr. Collins said earlier, in terms of the microban, that's not make or break in terms of how the project works. So if the committee wanted to not go with that option, that is something that I have no objection to.
Thank you. Is there anything else, any further discussion or questions? Nothing?
I'd make a motion?
Sure.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Phase 1 of the Shrewsbury High School Athletic Campus Improvement Plan as detailed in the document entitled Shrewsbury Track and Field Renovation Schematic Cost Estimate dated October 6, 2016, and proceed to final design and preparation of construction documents using synthetic turf carpet, shock pad materials as provided in our meeting documents, and infill material being EnviroFill without microban, and authorize related fundraising activities to begin immediately. If any new information regarding materials becomes available during the fundraising portion of this project, the school committee can revisit this topic.
Second. Oh, sorry, so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion of the debate? There being none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we